Chester Bennington was alone in his Beverly Hills home on March 15th, 2016, when he heard the back door close. Someone was inside. His family was away, security was minimal, and Chester was face-to-face with every celebrity's worst nightmare, an obsessed fan who had crossed every boundary. But what Chester did next defied every rule of celebrity safety, every piece of advice from security experts, and every instinct of self-preservation. Instead of running, hiding, or calling police, Chester Bennington invited his stalker to sit down. What happened in the next 3 hours didn't just save both their lives. It changed everything we know about how to handle dangerous obsession. This is the story of Angela Martinez, the woman who broke into Chester's home, and the conversation that transformed a potentially deadly encounter into something neither of them ever expected. When the full story came out years later, it would rewrite the handbook on celebrity security and prove that sometimes the most dangerous situations require the most human responses. Angela Martinez had been following Chester Bennington for 2 years before she finally found the courage to enter his home. But this wasn't the typical story of an obsessed fan seeking attention or fame. Angela's obsession with Chester grew from something much darker: her own struggle with mental illness, childhood trauma, and a desperate need to connect with someone who seemed to understand her pain. Angela was 34 years old, a former nurse from Phoenix who had lost her job, her family, and her sense of reality after a severe psychotic episode in 2014. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features, but without insurance or family support, she had been living on the streets, self-medicating with whatever substances she could find. Angela wasn't a typical stalker, explained Dr. Sarah Williams, the psychiatrist who later treated her. She was someone in the grip of a severe mental health crisis who had fixated on Chester as a lifeline. In her mind, Chester's music and his openness about mental health struggles made him the only person who could save her from her own thoughts. Angela had been camping in various locations around Los Angeles, always trying to get closer to Chester. She attended every Linkin Park concert in the area, waited outside recording studios, and gradually learned Chester's routines and movements. But she wasn't trying to hurt him, she was trying to reach him. Angela told me later that she believed Chester was sending her personal messages through his songs, Dr. Williams recalled. She thought that when he sang about pain and struggle, he was speaking directly to her situation. She convinced herself that if she could just talk to him, he would understand and help her. On March 15th, 2016, Angela discovered that Chester's family was out of town and that he was home alone. Security at the Beverly Hills house was minimal. Chester had always preferred privacy over protection, and he often dismissed bodyguards when he wanted normal family time. Angela had been watching the house for 3 days, learning the patterns of staff and security. She knew that the housekeeper left at 4 p.m. and that Chester often spent evenings alone in his home studio. Using her nursing background, Angela had also noticed that one of the back doors had a faulty lock that could be manipulated with the right tools. Angela spent hours planning her entry. Detective Michael Rodriguez, who investigated the incident, later revealed this wasn't a spontaneous break-in. She had observed the house, studied the security systems, and chosen her moment carefully. But her goal wasn't burglary or violence. She genuinely believed she was going to have a conversation with someone who would understand her. Angela entered the house through the back door around 6 p.m. while Chester was in his kitchen preparing dinner. She moved quietly through the house, not stealing anything or disturbing anything, just trying to find Chester. Her plan was simple: introduce herself, explain her situation, and ask for help. Chester was standing at the kitchen counter when he heard the back door close. His first instinct was to assume that his housekeeper had forgotten something and returned. But when he called out and received no answer, Chester realized something was wrong. "I heard footsteps that didn't sound right," Chester later told his therapist, Dr. Williams. "Too careful, too deliberate. I knew someone was in the house who shouldn't be there." Chester's training kicked in, not celebrity security training, but the survival instincts he developed growing up in an unstable household where unexpected visitors often meant trouble. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and moved carefully toward the living room. What Chester saw when he rounded the corner was not what he expected. Instead of a burglar or a dangerous intruder, he saw a small, disheveled woman sitting on his couch, crying. Angela had given up trying to find Chester and had simply sat down in his living room. overwhelmed by the reality of what she'd done. When I saw her, my first thought was that she looked more scared than I felt, Chester recalled. She was obviously homeless, obviously sick, and obviously not there to hurt me. She looked like someone who had reached the absolute end of her rope. Most celebrities, most people in general, would have called the police immediately. Angela had committed breaking and entering, stalking, and trespassing. She could have been arrested and charged with multiple felonies. But Chester looked at this woman crying on his couch and made a decision that stunned everyone who later heard about it. "Are you Angela?" Chester asked. Angela looked up, shocked that Chester knew her name. "How do you know who I am?" "You've been following me for months," Chester said, setting the knife down but staying at a safe distance. "My security team has spotted you at concerts, outside the studio, at restaurants. I know you're not here to hurt me, but I need to know why you're here." Angela broke down completely. "I just needed someone to understand," she sobbed. "I can't make the voices stop, and everyone thinks I'm crazy, and your music is the only thing that makes it quiet in my head. I thought maybe if I could just talk to you, you could help me figure out how to live with this." What happened next was something that security experts, law enforcement, and mental health professionals still debate. Instead of calling the police, Chester sat down on the opposite end of the couch and asked Angela to tell him about the voices. "I know what it's like to have noise in your head that won't stop," Chester told her. "I know what it's like to feel like you're going crazy, like nobody understands what you're going through. I'm not going to call the police right now, but I need you to help me understand what's happening with you." For the next 3 hours, Chester Bennington and Angela Martinez had one of the most extraordinary conversations in the history of celebrity stalking cases. Chester, drawing on his own experiences with mental illness and his secret work in crisis intervention, guided Angela through a detailed discussion of her symptoms, her trauma history, and her desperate need for help. Angela told me about hearing voices that told her she was worthless, about seeing things that weren't there, about feeling like she was completely disconnected from reality. Chester later recounted to Dr. Williams. But she also told me about being sexually abused as a child, about losing her job when she started having psychotic episodes, about her family abandoning her when she got sick. She wasn't just mentally ill. She was a trauma survivor who had never received proper treatment. The conversation revealed details that would later become crucial to Angela's treatment. She described how her symptoms had first appeared in her early 20s but had been dismissed as stress or women's problems by doctors who didn't take her seriously. She talked about years of misdiagnosis, ineffective medications, and a medical system that had failed her repeatedly. Angela had been to dozens of doctors over the years, Chester learned. She'd been told she had depression, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, even schizophrenia. But nobody had ever taken the time to really listen to her whole story and piece together what was actually happening. Chester recognized elements of his own story in Angela's experiences. The childhood abuse, the feeling of being misunderstood, the sense that music was the only thing that made life bearable. But he also recognized that Angela was in immediate danger, not from external threats, but from her own untreated mental illness. Chester asked me questions that no doctor had ever asked. Angela later told Dr. Williams. He wanted to know about my childhood, about what the voices said to me, about what made them quieter or louder. He wanted to know about my dreams, my fears, what I thought about when I was alone. He listened to me like I was a real person, not just a crazy stalker. During their conversation, Chester also shared parts of his own story that he'd never discussed publicly. He told Angela about his childhood sexual abuse, about his own struggles with hearing voices of self-doubt and self-hatred, about times when he'd felt so disconnected from reality that he wasn't sure what was real and what wasn't. Chester told me that he'd thought about hurting himself many times, Angela recalled. He said that sometimes when he was performing, he felt like he was watching himself from outside his body, like the person on stage wasn't really him. He helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't unique or shameful. It was just illness that needed treatment. As the conversation continued, Chester began to understand that Angela's stalking behavior wasn't motivated by romantic obsession or desire for fame. It was a symptom of her untreated psychosis combined with her desperate need for connection with someone who seemed to understand mental illness. Angela had latched onto me because my lyrics talked about the same things she was experiencing, Chester explained to Dr. Williams. She thought I was the only person who could understand her, And in a way, she was right. I did understand what it felt like to be trapped in your own mind, to feel like nobody else could comprehend the depth of your pain. The breakthrough moment in their conversation came when Chester asked Angela what she actually wanted from him. Angela had been expecting him to call the police, to have her arrested, to treat her like a criminal. Instead, Chester was treating her like a patient, like someone whose problems deserved attention and care. I told him I just wanted someone to believe that I wasn't crazy, that what I was experiencing was real, Angela remembered. I wanted someone to understand that I hadn't always been this way, that I used to be a good person with a job and friends and a normal life. Chester's response surprised Angela even more. He told her that he did believe her, that he could see that she was intelligent and caring beneath her illness, and that he thought she could get better with proper help. Chester said something that night that changed everything for me, Angela shared. He said, "Angela, you're not broken beyond repair. You're sick, and sick people can get better. But you have to be willing to accept help, even when accepting help feels scary." But Chester also understood that Angela was dangerous, not because she was violent, but because she was so disconnected from reality that she couldn't make safe decisions for herself or others. Her break-in could have resulted in her death if Chester had reacted with fear or violence, and her continuing untreated illness could lead to even more dangerous situations. Around 8 p.m., Chester began gently introducing the idea that Angela needed professional help. He explained that while he understood her experiences and wanted to help, he wasn't qualified to provide the kind of medical treatment she needed. "I could see that Angela was terrified of doctors and hospitals," Chester recalled. She'd had so many bad experiences with the mental health system that she associated medical care with punishment and abandonment. "I had to help her understand that not all treatment is the same, and that she deserved better care than what she'd received before." Chester spent considerable time explaining different types of mental health treatment, sharing his own positive experiences with therapy and medication, and helping Angela understand that seeking help wasn't an admission of failure or weakness. Chester told me about therapists who had helped him, about medications that had made his life better, about treatment programs that were designed to help people recover rather than just manage symptoms, Angela remembered. He made me understand that the bad experiences I'd had weren't representative of all mental health care. Around 9 p.m., Chester made a proposal that shocked Angela. Instead of calling the police to have her arrested, he wanted to call a mental health crisis team to have her evaluated and hopefully hospitalized for treatment. I told Angela that I could see she wasn't a criminal. She was someone having a medical emergency, Chester recalled. I explained that if the police came, she'd probably go to jail, where she wouldn't get the help she needed. But if she agreed to go to the hospital voluntarily, I would make sure she got proper treatment. Angela's initial reaction was panic. She begged Chester not to call anyone, promised she would leave and never bother him again, offered to do anything he wanted if he would just let her go. But Chester patiently explained why that wasn't a solution that would help either of them. Chester told me that if I left without getting help, I would probably end up doing something even more dangerous, Angela recalled. He said that my illness was getting worse, not better, and that eventually I might hurt myself or someone else without meaning to. He helped me see that going to the hospital wasn't punishment. It was the first step toward getting my life back. Angela was terrified of hospitals, of doctors, of being locked up. But Chester spent another hour talking her through her fears and helping her understand that hospitalization was her best chance of getting the help she desperately needed. Chester promised me that he would make sure I got good doctors, that someone would pay for my treatment, that I wouldn't be forgotten in the system, Angela remembered. He gave me his word that if I went to the hospital voluntarily, he would personally make sure I got the help I needed. Chester also made Angela a promise that would prove crucial to her recovery. He told her that when she was stable and ready, she could contact him to let him know how she was doing. He wanted her to understand that accepting help didn't mean being abandoned by the one person who had shown her genuine understanding. Chester wrote down his therapist's contact information and told me that Dr. Williams would be able to reach him if I needed anything during my treatment, Angela shared. He said that he believed in my ability to get better and that he wanted to know when I succeeded. At 10:30 p.m., Chester called the Los Angeles County Mental Health Crisis Team instead of the police. When the crisis counselors arrived, they found Chester and Angela sitting together in the living room, with Angela calm and willing to go to the hospital for evaluation. The crisis team was amazed. recalled Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who was part of the response team that night. Usually when we get calls about celebrity stalking, we find either a very agitated stalker and a terrified celebrity, or a violent confrontation that's already escalated. But Chester had managed to de-escalate the entire situation and get Angela to agree to voluntary treatment. The crisis team noted in their report that Angela appeared to be experiencing active psychotic symptoms, but was cooperative and oriented to the fact that she needed help. They also noted that Chester had provided valuable information about Angela's history and current mental state that would be crucial for her initial assessment. Chester had basically conducted a 3-hour crisis intervention session, Dr. Martinez observed. He'd gathered detailed information about Angela's symptoms, history, and needs, and he'd convinced her to accept help. It was textbook crisis counseling, performed by someone who clearly had extensive training and experience. Before Angela left with the crisis team, Chester made sure she had his therapist's contact information and reminded her of his promise to ensure she received good care. Angela later said that moment, when Chester reaffirmed his commitment to her well-being even as she was being taken away, was when she truly began to believe that recovery might be possible. Most people who had dealt with my illness saw it as the end of the conversation, Angela reflected. They'd call the police or have me hospitalized, and then I'd never hear from them again. But Chester was making it clear that getting treatment was the beginning of our interaction, not the end. Angela was taken to UCLA Medical Center for psychiatric evaluation, where she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance abuse disorder. But instead of being abandoned in the system, Angela found that someone had arranged for her treatment to be fully funded. Chester had kept his promise. Without any publicity or fanfare, he had arranged for Angela's medical expenses to be covered, for her to have access to the best psychiatric care available, and for her to have ongoing support throughout her recovery process. Chester didn't just pay for Angela's treatment, Dr. Williams explained. He stayed involved in her case, checking on her progress, making sure she had everything she needed. He treated her like a human being who deserved help, not like a criminal who had violated his privacy. Angela spent 3 months in intensive inpatient treatment, followed by 6 months in a supervised residential facility. Throughout her recovery, she received regular updates that her treatment was being supported by an anonymous donor, though she suspected it was Chester. The transformation was remarkable. With proper medication, therapy, and support, Angela's psychotic symptoms resolved, and she was able to develop insight into how her mental illness had affected her behavior. She was horrified to realize what she had done and deeply grateful for Chester's compassionate response. When I was stable enough to understand what had happened, I wrote Chester a letter apologizing for what I had done, Angela shared. I didn't expect him to respond, but he wrote back. He told me that he was proud of how hard I was working on my recovery and that he hoped I could use my experience to help other people who were struggling with mental illness. Chester's handling of Angela's break-in became a case study in crisis de-escalation and compassionate response to mental health emergencies. Mental health professionals, law enforcement agencies, and security experts studied his approach to understand how a potentially dangerous situation had been resolved without violence or legal consequences. Chester demonstrated something that we try to teach in crisis intervention training, explained Dr. Michael Torres, who directs crisis counselor training programs. When someone is acting dangerous because of mental illness, responding with empathy and understanding is often more effective than responding with fear and force. But Chester's decision to handle the situation the way he did came with significant risks. If Angela had been violent or unpredictable, Chester could have been seriously hurt or killed. His security team was furious when they learned what had happened, and they immediately implemented new protocols to prevent similar incidents. Chester took an enormous risk, acknowledged Detective Rodriguez. If Angela had been a different kind of person, or if her mental illness had manifested differently, this story could have had a tragic ending. But Chester's background in crisis intervention and his understanding of mental illness allowed him to assess the situation accurately and respond appropriately. The story of Chester and Angela remained private for over a year, known only to medical staff, crisis counselors, and a few close friends. Chester had no interest in publicizing his compassionate response or using it for positive media attention. But in late 2017, after Chester's death, Angela decided to tell her story publicly. She wanted people to know about Chester's kindness and to understand that mental illness can cause people to do things that seem dangerous but are actually cries for help. Chester saved my life that night, Angela told reporters. Not just by getting me treatment, but by treating me like a human being worthy of help instead of like a monster who deserved punishment. He showed me that even when we do terrible things because of mental illness, we can still be redeemed. Angela has remained in recovery and has become an advocate for mental health awareness and treatment access. She works with organizations that provide crisis intervention and has shared her story at conferences and training programs for law enforcement and security professionals. Angela's story with Chester has changed how we train officers to respond to mental health crises, explained Detective Rodriguez. We now teach de-escalation techniques and empathy-based approaches as alternatives to purely law enforcement responses. The case has also influenced celebrity security practices. While security experts still recommend caution and professional intervention for stalking situations, Chester's approach has led to more nuanced training that considers mental health factors and crisis intervention techniques. Chester proved that sometimes the most security-minded response isn't the most force-based response, explained Marcus Johnson, a celebrity security consultant. Understanding mental illness and having crisis intervention skills can be just as important as physical security measures. Chester's family learned about the incident only after his death, when Angela came forward with her story. They were initially shocked that Chester had put himself at risk, but ultimately proud of his compassionate response. That was so typical of Chester, his ex-wife Talinda later reflected. He could have had Angela arrested and thrown in jail, and nobody would have criticized him for it. But he saw someone who was suffering and needed help, and he chose to help her instead of punish her. That's the kind of person he was. The conversation between Chester and Angela lasted only 3 hours, but its impact has lasted for years. Angela's recovery has inspired other people with mental illness to seek treatment. Chester's approach has influenced training programs for crisis intervention, and their story has become a powerful example of how compassion can transform even the most frightening situations. Today, Angela Martinez works as a peer counselor, helping other people with mental illness navigate the treatment system and find hope in their darkest moments. She credits Chester Bennington not just with saving her life, but with showing her that her life was worth saving. Chester could have seen me as a threat, a criminal, a crazy person, Angela reflects. Instead, he saw me as someone who was sick and needed help. That moment of recognition, that decision to treat me with dignity instead of fear, changed everything for me. It showed me that no matter how far I had fallen, I was still worthy of compassion. Chester Bennington faced every celebrity's worst nightmare that night in March 2016. But instead of responding with fear, anger, or punishment, he responded with the same empathy and understanding that had made him a voice for millions of people struggling with mental health issues. In the end, Chester's decision to sit down and talk with his stalker instead of having her arrested proved that sometimes the most dangerous situations require the most human responses. Sometimes the person who seems like your biggest threat is actually someone who needs your help. And sometimes 3 hours of genuine conversation can save 2 lives at the same time.